It is great to see your faces, or alternatively, your names on the screen. Um, During the teaching itself, I'm going to ask that everybody stay muted until we come to the discussion portions. But because we haven't started yet and we have a few minutes before we begin, feel free to unmute yourself. I'd love to say hello to your voices too. Amazing. Oh, hello faces. Ah, Keith and Honey. Can I hear you now?
Hello, Shana Tova. It's good to see you all.
Oh, it's so good to see you.
We're
Mark,
just coming from the
wow.
color, which was amazing.
It was extraordinary, wasn't it?
Extraordinary.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
And such a good follow-on to last night's sermon.
absolutely. It feels very important to hear these stories before we start any discussions, before, as a community, we start talking about what are we doing, what have we done, what can we do better, to actually sit and listen for an hour feels, it feels like a gift to be able to do that. Yeah. Did everybody here go to that panel first, or are some of you coming to this for the, okay. Ah, amazing. So the afternoon study sessions today have a bunch of different options. So it will be wonderful if you decide to stay for the whole half hour with us. But also there's no pressure to do that. There's poetry to learn from, and there's a new rabbinic intern to learn from. So if you feel like your learning is going to take you in a different direction this afternoon, please feel free to dip in and dip out of the different sessions. That said, if you decide to stay in this session, I will be delighted to be learning with you and learning from this perspective that we so rarely get to hear. And isn't that a theme of our Yom Kippur this year? Hearing the voices that we don't always get to hear from. People whose voices are part of our world and part of our Jewish world, and who we don't always get to hear. I think of Bibi, the boy in Australia with his mother who sang Avinu Malkeinu for us this morning. That's a voice we don't always get to hear. Wasn't that extraordinary?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And other voices that we don't get to hear from, like the True Colors panelists, and our own congregants who joined that panel. So, yeah. This session is about bringing a different voice that we don't always hear from, an Orthodox voice. Now, it is a progressive Orthodox voice that we will be hearing from, but it is nonetheless an Orthodox voice. So the session that we have today is going to kind of happen in two pieces, and these pieces fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. It's not one half and another half. So we will get to hear from Rabbi Daniel Atwood, who is a progressive Orthodox rabbi who is based in Chicago, as a friend of mine. So we'll hear his teaching on the connections between Shabbat and Yom Kippur, ultimately ending with a message of social justice, how our Haftarah portion for today speaks to social justice in the Orthodox community. And we will also, because Rabbi Atwood does not use technology during a Yom Tov, he has recorded his teaching, but we're going to pause it multiple times so that we as a community can discuss. I hope that you will feel free and feel welcome to post any of the questions that you have that occur to you throughout this teaching in the chat box. The chat box is active. We can all participate there. We can chat during the teaching as well as in the breaks. And then as we pause the teaching, we will get a chance to discuss with one another. So let me tell you briefly about Daniel Atwood. He is a progressive Orthodox rabbi. He is a colleague and a friend of mine. We did work through Truah, the rabbinic call for human rights, together. He and his husband now live in Chicago, where Daniel teaches. And he is going to talk to us, as I mentioned, about the connection between Yom Kippur and Shabbat, and how that then brings us to a place of action, of improving the world that we live in. And I think it's especially interesting for us to learn this from the perspective of someone who traditionally observes Shabbat, so a person whose voice, again, we don't always get to hear. For those of you that I don't know, I am Rabbi Sarah Berman. I am a rabbi and director of adult education here at Central Synagogue. I'm mostly seeing faces and names I know, but there's some folks that I haven't gotten to meet yet, so it's good to see you today. So let us turn to Rabbi Atwood and his teaching. We have a source sheet that Allie, thank you so much for being here and for doing this for us, that Allie has posted into the chat box so we can follow along with what Rabbi Atwood is teaching us. So, shall we begin? Let's hear from Rabbi Atwood.
My name is Rabbi Daniel Atwood. I live in Chicago, Illinois. I'm a teacher, and I am so excited to be to have the honor to give a shiur, to give a presentation about the Haftarah, about the reading for Yom Kippur to Central Synagogue. Central Synagogue, a place close to my heart that I've worked with in previous capacities and collaborated with on social justice work. So a lot of respect for many people, and also want to thank my very good friend, Rabbi Sarah Berman, for the invitation to present to you all today. So the Haftarah for Yom Kippur comes from the book of Yeshayahu, the book of Isaiah, chapters 57 to 58, mostly 58. And it talks about I'd say the gist of the Haftarah is, don't just fast, do the right thing. God says, I don't want you just fasting and keeping all these laws and not eating and not wearing fancy shoes and not taking shower, things people do on Yom Kippur. The point of the prohibitions of Yom Kippur, the point of fasting, is to make you a good person. So please, he says, God says, do not fast and then oppress the poor, and don't give to the poor, and have people hungry, have people without clothes, people who are marginalized in society, and turn a blind eye to that. Don't fast and think you've done anything good. I want you to be a good person. Fasting, perhaps it's a means to doing that. Perhaps it's an additional thing. We'll talk about that a little bit. But the main thing you need to do is be a good person. That's what God wants. And the rituals help that along. Okay, so that is the gist of Isaiah 58. However, interestingly, so that is until verse 12, really, of Isaiah 58. Isaiah 58, verse 13, takes a little bit of a detour, it seems. It says, Im tashiv mi shavat raglecha asot chefzecha b'yom kodshi v'karata l'shabat oneg l'kdosh Adonai mechubad v'chibato me'asot drachecha v'imtzo chefzecha v'daber davar. If you refrain from trampling the Sabbath, from pursuing your affairs on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath delight, the Lord's holy day honored, if you honor it and not go about your way, nor look to your affairs, nor strike bargains, then good things will happen. As titana Adonai, then you will delight in the Lord. So it's interesting because I'm reading the Haftarah and I'm wondering, why are we talking about Shabbat? We were just talking about fast days and how fast days, the whole point of the fast days is that you don't just fast, you need to be a good person, you take care of the poor. Why is it now telling me, oh, and if you keep Shabbat, like good things will happen? Okay, like no one was talking about Shabbat. Actually, we learn a lot of halachot, of laws about Shabbat from this pasuk, from this verse, about a lot of things related to what is called often the spirit of Shabbat, because it talks about not going about your ways and looking at your affairs, so not doing business matters, not just talking about your business life. This is even speaking differently, so speaking in a softer tone, walking slowly, not running to different places, not being in a rush, things that aren't strictly laws. It's not a law, don't be in a rush on Shabbat, but it's because of this verse from Yeshayahu, talks about Shabbat being a day of not going about your normal ways. But what does it have to do with Yom Kippur? Why is it, or fast days? Why is this here? Why is this pasuk in the middle of a chapter that's talking about fast days that is read on Yom Kippur? There seems to be no connection. So, thankfully, I'm not the first person who thought of this question. The Gemara in Shabbat, the Talmud Bavli, on Shabbat page 119a, Kuf Yud Tet Amud Aleph, implies a question, why is this here? Amar le Reish Galuta l'Rav Hamnuna, the exilarch said to Rav Hamnuna, Mai dichtiv v'likdosh Adonai mechubad. What is the meaning of the verse, the Holy One of God is honored? So remember in that verse I just read, it said, from pursuing your affairs on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath delight and the Lord's day honored. So what does that second part mean, the Lord's day honored? Amar le Rav Hamnuna responded, Ze Yom HaKippurim. This is referring to Yom Kippur. They made a connection. She'ein b'lo achila v'lo shetiyah. That where you don't eat and you don't drink. Amra Torah, kabdehu b'chsut nikiyah. So the Torah, or here the Nevi'im, is telling us to honor the day of Yom Kippur with a clean garment. So one of the other halachos, other laws I failed to mention earlier, that we learned from this verse about Shabbat, is it says, if you should call my Sabbath delight. So we learn from there that you should eat nice foods. You should wear nice clothes. You should make Shabbat, do something special. Make Shabbat a nice, special day. That's why people have big meals, eat nice foods, drink a nice wine on Shabbat, because of this verse. And Rav Hamnuna said, and why does it say then, call the Sabbath delight and the Lord's day honored? So what's the Lord's day? The Lord's day is Yom Kippur.
So this is where we're going to pause for the first time, and I will invite you, as you have things to say, to unmute yourself. Because the first question is, for you, what is the connection between these two most holy days, Shabbat and Yom Kippur? Is there, for you, a connection between Shabbat and Yom Kippur? In practice, in experience, in how you treat the days, in how you treat yourself on these days? is there a connection for you? And I will invite you to unmute yourself.
Well,
There we go. Thanks, Keith.
for me, because I must confess, although I often go to Friday night Shabbat services, that's the extent, and perhaps a nice dinner and lighting candles, that's the extent of my observation of Shabbat. Whereas since I was a little boy, Yom Kippur was clearly special. It's the one day I won't respond to emails or watch television. So, but what is the connection? So Yom Kippur for me is about my relationship to God. And at least philosophically for me, I guess Shabbat in saying, don't do all the things you normally do. Forget what your normal life is like. Well, okay, that's fine. But if I'm not going to do the things I normally do, what's left? And what's left would be to think about my relationship to God. So in that sense, there are two holidays that are about my relationship to God, even though, as I said, I don't observe Shabbat.
Fair, fair. Sue, I saw that you had unmuted yourself. Did you have something to share?
I think so.
Great.
I know so. I think of on the 2 day on Yom Kippur as well as on Shabbat. I look internally, but I externally at the same. I feel part of a community and feel more Jewish, if you will, than I do the rest of the time. And then I realized, but especially on Yom Kippur, that all over the world, Jews are coming together and looking within themselves and sharing, whether it's out loud or just internally. And I never feel like other on those days.
That's amazing. Paula, I see you've also unmuted.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Most of my family is Orthodox or beyond Orthodox, and it's interesting the perspective, because for them Shabbat is like a mini Yom Kippur every week. It's the preparation. It's all of Thursday. It's this thing that's very Jewish of the separation of the sacred and the secular. And it happens on this regular basis. And, I think we're very used to, especially in America, of putting everything aside, and it's all this annual kind of preparation and special separation. But we have the opportunity to do it every week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Phyllis, you need to unmute yourself, though, for us to hear you.
I've got it.
There we go.
We probably take Shabbat for granted because it's every week. That if it was once a year, the same fuss would be made. But on Yom Kippur, we are atoning. And one of the things we should be atoning is our not appreciating and taking advantage of Shabbat every week.
That's so interesting. That there is a teaching that we should live each day as if, atone as if you are dying the next day, which can apply to Shabbat. It can apply to any day, and it can, like you said, become so rote. Even when we try to make ourselves aware of our own mortality and try to make ourselves, even daily, try to atone, try to improve, try to return to what we know to be the best path. It can be not numbing, that's not the right word, but we can get used to it. It can become routine, certainly. So there are things that we can do that remind us that these days are special, both Yom Kippur and Shabbat. And so that's the next piece that Rabbi Atwood is going to dive into, the importance of wearing nice and special clothing on Shabbat and Yom Kippur as one way, as a very important way for us to focus ourselves, to be able to pay attention to these particular times. So Allie will go back to the video. As you can see, we are skipping a little bit ahead, but we are getting really the body of Rabbi Atwood's teachings here.
Okay, so Yom Kippur, you wear nice clothing, you know, very nice. Like what does that, is there a deeper meaning to that? Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year. What does it mean to wear nice clothing? I wear my tuxedo? How does that honor Yom Kippur? Kippur, it's a serious day. It's my day, you know, before God in judgment. So I honor it by wearing my tuxedo? Is that really, like that's it? Or is there something more? So there is something. Because we look at the halachot, let's look at the laws of what they actually want us to wear. This comes from the Shulchan Aruch, from the compendium of Jewish law written by Rabbi Yosef Karo in 16th century. It's sort of the considered the authoritative text, definitely for Orthodox Jews, but also for many other types of Jews. Of this is sort of almost like the Constitution. Like these are the laws. Not that things haven't adapted and built off of that over the years, but this is the base text. And this comes from Orach Chaim, which discusses the laws of sort of everyday life, including Orach Chaim, the way of life, including the laws of holidays. This comes from 610-4. It's broken into many short chapters, and then even shorter sections. So this is sort of law 610, section 4 of the Shulchan Aruch. Nohagim b'chol makom laharbot neirot bevate knesiot ulahatzia begadim na'im beveit knesset. We are accustomed in every place on Yom Kippur to increase candles in synagogues and spread nice garments in the synagogue. So on Yom Kippur, the practice is to make the synagogue look nice. Great. Yesh Katvu, and this is the Rama being so Rabbi Yosef Karo was Sephardic, and Rama, Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, was Ashkenazic, and he sort of added into the text of the Shulchan Aruch places where Ashkenazic customs. Sometimes they're in opposition to Sephardic customs, sometimes they're just in addition to Sephardic customs. So this doesn't seem to go against anything, it just seems to be an additional thing. Yesh shekatvu, he writes, some have written, shenahagu, there's a practice, lilbosh bigadim levanim unkim b'yom kippurim, to wear white, clean clothing on Yom Kippur. Dugmat malachei asharet, like the ministering angels who, in some sort of pictorial conception, probably some Christian iconography there, are wearing white. So wearing white, clean clothing, so I wouldn't wear a tuxedo, I would wear something white. V'chein nogin lilvosh hakittel, shehu lavan v'naki, gam hu begen metim. So therefore, there's a custom to wear what's known as the kittel. Maybe some of you are wearing that today. Maybe the prayer leader is wearing that today. Sort of a white, fully white robe that is traditionally worn by men. Now, many women wear as well. Traditionally worn a few times throughout the year, at a wedding. Often people will wear it at their weddings, especially men. If the woman is wearing a white dress, a man will often be wearing a kittel. I wore a kittel at my wedding. Both my husband and I wore kittels at our weddings, actually. People wear it on Yom Kippur. Some people will wear it at the Seder on Pesach, on Passover Seder. It's a white robe worn on Yom Kippur. So instead of my kittel, it's not my nicest, most expensive item of clothing that I own, but it is pure. It's a white robe. I'm dressed in white. And it's, as the Ramah adds, it is also the custom is to bury the dead in kittel, sort of resembling a shroud, a white shroud that the dead are buried in. And by wearing this, he adds, the man's heart is subservient and broken. So he sort of, by wearing a shroud, it sort of reminds you of death, which is sort of perhaps appropriate on Yom Kippur when you're thinking about, the books of life and death.
Oof. So as we dive into this idea that this garment, this pure white garment, this kittel, is worn on Yom Kippur, can be worn at weddings, and it is the garment, or it rehearses the garment that one wears in death. I wanted to ask, does clothing help you get into the mental and spiritual space that you seek on a holiday like Shabbat or Yom Kippur? And related to that, how would, or for those of you who are wearing kittels, how does wearing a kittel help you experience this day? And as you consider your answers, how does clothing help you get into the experience of a day like Shabbat or Yom Kippur? I'll tell you, yes, I am not wearing shoes because that's not a thing that I do, but I am wearing a dress today for maybe the third time in the last 6 months. For me, wearing the garment that I wear helps put me into the mind frame and the spiritual space that I seek. Not like a costume, but almost like putting on this specific part of myself. So I'm curious how that sits with any of you and what your experiences are. Phyllis, please go ahead. You have to unmute though, because we want to hear you. That should give you a little button to push. There you go.
Now it worked. First, I'm asking you if you would let us see each other.
Ah.
If you could do that. And I'm asking you in my white blouse.
Oh, I see your white blouse.
Yes, and I did, look in the closet. What have I got white that I can wear today?
Yeah.
And every Yom Kippur. It's
so
just
to answer that first part of your question, you can all see each other if you click on in your top right corner of your screen. You should see a bunch of tiny little squares. If you aren't already looking at everybody's faces, icon with a bunch of tiny little squares that is the gallery view, and click on that, and then you'll get to see everybody who's in this Zoom room. And I'm seeing quite a number of white shirts. And Phyllis, it sounds like you do that every year.
Yes, I do, but I can't.
Paula, were you gesturing so that we could see your blouse as well? If you want to speak, please unmute. I want to hear you.
I was showing Phyllis my white blouse as well, which is and it's an interesting thing. I thought that your comment, Rabbi, about for the first time wearing a dress for the first time in 6 months. I did the same thing last night, and you do feel different. This sweatpants culture we've all fallen into. It really was a good chance to kind of wake up and go, oh, that's what that feels like, and it is special.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Jody, please.
Hey, I decided that it was time to put a dress on as well. Typically, I would wear white for Yom Kippur, but for some reason I pulled out red. It's just all upside down these days. But it does make you feel different, and it makes you feel, it makes me feel more spiritual rather than sitting in the bed with the door shut and with my machzor on my lap or whatever. It just, now I'm in a dress, I'm on a chair, and I feel much more a part of it all. And yeah.
Thank you. It looks like Niles Berman, also known as Dad, has unmuted. Is that true? Yes, you are unmuted.
So Sarah, I wonder if there's a different answer to your question in these COVID days versus years prior. It won't surprise you that the dress in quote, normal times is not something that's particularly meaningful to me. To me, the focus of Yom Kippur as Shabbat is on things outside us, is on not on the material, not on the everyday. And so personally, dressing as I would to go to the office doesn't do anything to enhance the spirituality of those holiday experiences. But in these COVID times, I can see that it does provide some separation from, as somebody just mentioned the sweatsuits, etc. And so I can see that it might enhance the experience. But again, I think our answer to your question today is different than it would have been last year, and hopefully will be next year.
I mean, Kenya Hiratzon made that be true. But I think, yes, absolutely yes, period at the end of the sentence. And the question becomes, why do we need this? Why do we need to dress differently? Why do we need to sit in a different space, a chair as opposed to the bed, in a different room as opposed to where we usually spend our time? What, for us this year, in this COVID year, those are the ways that we express difference. But why do we need that? And I think that that's what Rabbi Atwood teaches at the end of his teaching, which is what we will listen to in the last few minutes we have together. So we will finish his teaching and then finish our time together.
The law ends up becoming that on Yom Kippur, the practice, more of a practice than a law, the practice is to wear, whether a man or a woman or anything, to wear a pure white, either kittel, robe, or dress, piece of clothing that is without anything fancy, without fancy jewelry, without patterns and colors and ties and scarves and other things that people wear on top, to just wear this pure white robe. And somehow that is a fulfillment of honoring the day of Yom Kippur, the Lord's Day being honored. How is that honoring Yom Kippur? What were we talking about before? We were talking about, in the chapter in Isaiah, the point of Yom Kippur is to not just follow the laws. The point of Yom Kippur is to do good, is to become a better person. Don't just not eat. Make sure that the people who are hungry are fed. Maybe don't eat. It will help you remember that there are people who don't have access to food. Don't just say, oh, how sad is life. Talking about the book of life, a lot of the Piyutim, a lot of the songs are about sadness and death, and we all experience that. But also keep in mind, there are people in a lot worse situations than ourselves. And don't just wear fancy clothing. In fact, don't wear fancy clothing. Because I think that's where the law went. Originally in the Talmud, it said the way you honor Yom Kippur is you wear nice clothing. But the law, the halachot, is actually, no, don't wear my fancy tuxedo. I'm not wearing my tuxedo on Yom Kippur. I'm wearing my kittel, my white robe, pure and simple, no tie, no jewelry, no necklace, no scarf. I'm not trying to look fabulous or fancy. I'm just wearing my white robe. Simple. Simple, pure white robe. I think by doing that, it will be nichna. It'll sort of make our heart, nichna levavenu, subservient, aware that not everyone has access to the fancy clothes that I might have access to. And I'm not.
It's that reminder. These clothes are that trigger, that reminder that not everybody has what we have, that there's always a way for us to be aware of the world, even in something as personal as our clothing and in what we ingest or don't on various days of the year. But it's this reminder through our halakha, through this script for how to be Jewish, we get reminded about being a part of this world and not ever being just alone, not ever having no impact on the world around us. And that right there, that is the connection between Shabbat and Yom Kippur. That is the lesson that we learn on this day, that we are people in the world with connections, and we can have an impact. So I thank you all so much for joining us in this session. It's been a delight. It has been an oneg to be here with you for this short time together. I invite you to join us in our next study session, which will be with Rabbi Rick Jacobs, starting in just a few minutes. I need to go into that Zoom room to see Rabbi Jacobs, and I hope I will see you all in there. Gemar Chatima Tova, Tzom Kol, Shana Tova.